My name is Douglas Johnston. I served in the U.S. Navy during World War II from 1943, when I just got out of high school, until August of 1946. War didn't hit home to me until Japan, till Pearl Harbor attack. I enlisted because my father was a band director at Larned High School here in Kansas, and he had a very good friend on the draft board. And this friend told my father that when I graduated from high school in spring of '43, he told me that summer that I was going to be probably in the draft in September. So in July, I went to Kansas City and enlisted in the Navy because I didn't want the Army. To me, Army was digging a foxhole and fighting out of a foxhole, and I thought I'd much rather be on board a ship in the sea, taking my chances there rather than in foxhole. In boot camp, I passed the swimming test right off because I was able to swim well enough that I could swim by holding my arms up and just kicking with my feet for 5 minutes, and swim around the pool and up in boot camp several times that was required. So I didn't have any trouble passing the swimming test. The only regret that I had, because my father was a band director and I knew how to play 3 instruments at the time, and at the interview in boot camp with the counselor, why, when he found out that I could play several instruments and had dance band experience as well as military type band playing, why, he said, well, I think we could send you to the Navy School of Music in Washington, D.C. He said, but there's just one hitch to it. He said, if we did that, you'd have to sign up for 6 years instead of the duration of the war. 6 years sounded like a long time to me, so I chose not to do that. I sometimes wonder how that would have changed my life if I had gone to the Navy School of Music, but as it was, I wouldn't have met the wife, the girl that I married, and so on and so forth, so it all worked out well in the long run. My only travel experience was to Colorado. My parents liked to camp, and we had the old-fashioned umbrella tent, and we used to go up to Rocky Mountain National Park every summer and camp out and hike and fish, and I did that all 4 years of high school. So when I got married, of course, I took my wife to Estes Park, Colorado, Rocky Mountain National Park, for our honeymoon. She liked that because she'd never, the farthest she'd been, she was from St. John, Kansas, and the farthest she'd ever been away from home was eastern Colorado to visit relatives. My dad was a band teacher, so I lived in about 6 different towns. I was born in Emporia, Kansas, moved to Oakley, Kansas, then to Kinsley, Kansas, then to Wichita, then to Peabody, then to Larned, and then that took me up to the time I was in the Navy. My boot camp was up in the wilds of Farragut, Idaho. There were lakes up there for boat training, and it was closest town was Spokane, Washington, 45 miles away. We reached boot camp by train. Boot camp was 8 weeks of training. We lived in a barracks with about 200 men in our company. It was very cold in the morning, and this was September and October. We had drill on a large field nearby, and we had 1 week of work week besides training. We had, my job was to clean out the soot out of flue pipes from the furnaces in all the barracks for 1 week. But then we also got KP duty of peeling spuds and serving chow, and went home for 30 days leave, and then back to boot camp complex again to get assigned. And that was when I was assigned then to go to radio school at the University of Chicago, University of Chicago, for radio training. And because I could type so well and evidently caught on to Morse code easily, that only about 1/10 of the class got promoted to the next rank, and I was lucky enough to get promoted from second-class seaman to first-class seaman. When I was in Chicago, I went down to the Loop, they called it, often. Well, one reason why I could go so often was shortly after I arrived in radio school, the captain or the commanding officer of the radio school decided that he would like to have a band for inspection on Saturday morning. So the call went out for anybody that could play an instrument to come and try out. And so I had my parents ship my clarinet to me, and for the interview they said, what music would you like to play? And I said, well, I still remember John Philip Sousa's Washington Post March by memory. I would play that for him. So I played this John Philip Sousa's Washington Post March by memory. And they said, you got first chair. And by playing in the band, we got an extra liberty that the others did not get. So we got a Wednesday, middle of the week liberty. And so I always went to the Loop, sometimes with a friend, sometimes by myself. Took in most of the big movie houses in Chicago had a stage production in between the showing of the feature film. And so I got to hear Gene Krupa, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey, all the big name bands on these stage shows at the theaters. So that was what I spent a good deal of my time, plus went to the USO, and they oftentimes had big name bands there too performing. Benny Goodman and when, like I said, Tommy, I got to hear Tommy Dorsey, and that was when Frank Sinatra was singing with him, and the girls would all swoon in the aisle. Went to the Opera House to a few performances, and of course I'd always heard of vaudeville, so went a couple times to see the old-fashioned, old-style vaudeville. Well, from there I was sent to Miami, Florida, and joined a crew for a ship that we had not picked up yet. And we went into training on small craft, subchaser type patrol craft out of Miami. And then when our ship was completed up at the Brooklyn Navy Yard up in New York, why, then our crew went up to New York and picked up the ship, and then had to put it through its sea trials and all. And this is just the way the government or the service works sometimes. Brand new ship, and then it was called a PC, patrol craft. We took this brand new ship down the coast to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, put it in dry dock in a shipyard there, and they stripped her down and rebuilt it with a lot of armor plate and extra guns and all, and made what they called a patrol motor gunboat out of it. It was powered by 2 large diesel engines. Well, the kind of guns that we were going to have on our ship were 50 caliber machine guns, 20 millimeter automatic fire guns, and a 3-inch gun. And I did most of my work on the 20 millimeter, and that's what I was using at the time that I shot down a Japanese Kamikaze plane that was about to hit us. The magazine held 80 rounds and had a fellow standing next to me. I was strapped into a harness, and I had a fellow standing next to me ready to take out a magazine and clip a new one in. We had a electronic gun sight, but we didn't have much luck with it, and so not far into the war, we switched to tracer control. Every third shell was a tracer that would flare, and so when we were shooting, we just watched the tracers and fired by watching the tracers. Short bursts, otherwise the barrel would get so hot that it would melt. The handler that handled the magazine, we had a chute with water, filled with water, and when the barrel got hot, just a twist of the barrel would release it, put it in the water to cool, and slap another barrel in. Well, the PT boats were just a small wooden craft. Yeah, they were made of wood. PT boats were made of wood, and they had a Chrysler engine in them, and a crew of maybe 7. Well, our gunboat had a crew of 60 men and 5 officers, so it was considerably larger. Went overseas, went to Hawaii first, and there we picked up a group of small LSMs and LCIs, flat-bottom boats, and had to take them to Guam. And they were so slow-moving that we took up the rear position, only used 1 engine out of our 2, and still zigzag back and forth, otherwise we'd go too fast for them. I think top speed was about 23 knots. We were on what was called, off Okinawa, a lot of ships were being hit by kamikaze planes.
With still no tangible way to repel the aerial kamikazes, the Commander-in-Chief for the Pacific Theater, Admiral Nimitz, conferred with other high-ranking officials and even put out a call to everyone in the fleet for ideas on how to reduce the menace. Someone, although history does not know exactly who, came up with the picket defense. It involved sending smaller craft, destroyers and minesweepers ahead of the fleet in the hopes of picking up the kamikazes on radar before they hit the main fleet and the Navy's precious aircraft carriers. It was a dangerous assignment, and some of the men called the pickets tethered goats, after the age-old shepherd's trick of sending the weakest of the flock to be attacked by wolves to save the rest. Indeed, the desperate kamikazes, wanting to do anything to avoid returning home to face the shame of failure and the prospect of preparing once again to die, descended on these smaller craft with a vengeance. It seemed by this point that a kamikaze would go after any kind of Allied vessel, from battleship to troop transports. Although the picket defense worked, the casualties were high, as were the numbers of sinkings.
To try to intercept them before they got to the island, stationed in all points around the island, we had what was called radar picket duty. And in our group there were 5 ships, 2 destroyers, our gunboat, and 2 flat-bottomed LCI boats. And we were just to circle an area and watch for planes either coming into the island or leaving the island. And the day that I shot a kamikaze down, 5 planes came over after they had bombed on Okinawa, and the 2 bombers tried to gain for height, and the 3 fighters that were with them swooped down then and started to attack our group. And all of us were firing, and they came around the destroyers shot 2 of the planes down rather quickly. The 3rd plane came in low over the water from out of the sun so that we would be looking into the sun. And one of the LCIs crossed our stern real close by, and as he swooped over, he dropped a bomb which did not look like a bomb. It just looked like a cylinder because it just wobbled as it fell. But it landed on the fantail of the LCI right where the 40-millimeter gun tub was, and exploded all that ammunition, and it just literally blew the whole rear end off that ship and killed many people. The 2 fellows that were in the metal gun control tub for firing the 40-millimeter gun tub, all of their body that was above the edge of the gun tub was just absolutely blown away. And then the ship, after the plane crossed their path and dropped the bomb, he came straight for us. And our captain made the mistake of ordering a starboard turn instead of a port turn. And if he'd ordered a port turn, it would have put us broadside to the plane, making it most of all maximum guns on bearing on him. But as it was, when he turned, the wheelhouse then blocked the 3-inch gun and the forward 20-millimeter gun, and they could no longer fire. And so that left 2 20-millimeters amidship and a 50 caliber machine gun. The 20-millimeter gun to my left was in the process of changing barrel or changing ammunition when one of my shots luckily hit him, and he had gotten so close to us that we just had to cover ourselves with our arms because of all the shrapnel and debris that was falling. And then that was the last plane, and so the attack was over, and we then went alongside the ship that got hit by the bomb, and we transported 50 of their crew to a hospital ship. Well, we were there 5 days before the invasion. The invasion of Okinawa was April Fool's Day. It would have been in March, the last 5 days of March. We were in support of mine sweeper ships, and they would go in with their paravanes and cables and sweep up the mines, and then we would come along behind them and shoot the mines after they'd floated to the top and destroyed the mines. After we left Okinawa, I had an appendicitis attack and had to be transferred to another ship and have my appendix removed. And that was kind of interesting because the captain of this ship had the ship turn into the wind to minimize wave action, and had all work parties stop on board ship so there's no hammering or motors running or anything, and while they operated on me, and so then after I had it by I can't say the term now, very small incision, and so I wasn't laid up for very long. And in the meantime, while I was recuperating, my ship went to the Philippines, and they didn't think there's any way they could get me back to it. So they said, well, we'll just keep you on board this ship and put you in a radio shack in radioman duties. And then somehow a call went out that this captain was organizing a staff to go to the inland sea of Japan to rid the inland sea of mines so that our invasion forces could go in and land in the inland sea of Japan and not have to worry about mines. So this captain needed a radioman on his staff. So here was an available man, so I got put on the, I and another lieutenant got assigned to his staff. He wasn't there, so we followed him to Formosa. He wasn't there. He'd gone to Shanghai, so then we went to Shanghai to catch up with him. We got to Shanghai. He'd already left for Japan, and so we finally got caught up with him in Japan then. And one interesting thing I might tell you about this mine demolition work in the inland sea of Japan, we took a cargo type vessel and equipped controls to control the engine from up on the bridge so that nobody would need to be below decks. And the mines sweepers would go in and make their sweeps to get rid of the mines, but there were also magnetic or pressure type mines below the surface that the minesweepers couldn't reach those. And so after they were through making their runs, we would take this ship with everybody on board up above deck, not below deck, and we'd just go back and forth across the area to make sure there were no pressure mines. Well, this one day I was sitting in the radio shack, and back in those days, a Remington or a Royal typewriter probably weighed 70 pounds or something like that. And we went over a pressure mine close enough that it exploded it. It broke all kinds of fuel lines and water lines, and it broke 105 radio tubes in our radio shack. And when that explosion went off, I went over backwards in my chair, and I saw that 70-pound typewriter just go through the air over my head. This was, let's see, the war ended in August of '45. This would have been September, October, November, long in there. We were there 5 days, so I think I had 3 liberties in Shanghai. Very congested, very dirty. The harbor was just full of Navy ships, but it was also just full of Chinese junks and small craft that, and they would be tied up side by side, and the people would walk back and forth across each other's boats to do things. And we went to mostly to the international district of Shanghai, where they had nice restaurants, and but the streets were very dirty. The shopkeepers would bring their children out to the curb and let them urinate and go to the bathroom right on the street. And we so amused at the international restaurant that we went to. Just the head waiter was the only one that could speak any words of English, and he wasn't too fluent. And but with his help, we decided, there were 5 of us, we decided we'd all like to try the roast duck. And so we all ordered roast duck, and he kept shaking his head no. He said, yes, that's what we want, roast duck. No. And he finally got it across to us that 1 roast duck was enough for all 5 of us. And when it came under silver dome, and lifted the dome off, and there were the feet, the head, the eyes, all of the duck was there. Very interesting, but it was very tasty. And we had bean sprouts, and I don't know, about a 13-course dinner. And the cups of tea were so small, the little waitress got so tickled because I think I drank either 19 or 20 cups of tea. because they were so small. But it was an interesting experience. When we got to Formosa, small boats came out to the ship trying to sell sake, liquor, and trinkets and stuff like that. And they kept pretty close watch trying to keep the sailors from obtaining any of the sake. But we were just there in that port overnight and left. But in Shanghai, we were fortunate enough to be there 5 days before we went to Japan, so we got to have some liberty in Shanghai. At the port of Kobe, Japan, on the inland sea, we got a couple of liberties there. One half of the ship would get liberty one day, and the other half of the ship would get it the next day. And I was with a friend that was far more gutsy than I was. We got off into areas that we weren't supposed to be and talked to Japanese girls that could have led us astray, and we could have been in real trouble, but fortunately we weren't. But for me, the most interesting thing at Kobe was we got invited to the country club place where all the foreign ministers from the different countries attended, and they were going to have wives and daughters and people there to let the sailors dance with. But this friend of mine was an excellent guitarist, and I had my clarinet, and so we furnished the music for all the dancing. So on our liberty, why, we played for the dancing, and that was really experience. And when we were in Shanghai, I went to a nightclub, and I and my friend talked two of the members of the dance band there into letting us play a little bit using their instruments. So that was a fun thing to do. I didn't know anything about the atomic bomb until they announced that it had been dropped on Japan, and they told what magnitude it was and how many hundreds of thousands of people it killed and all of which, and it just blew our mind really, because we didn't know anything about atomic bombs. One interesting thing I might add was when I was in radio school at the University of Chicago, we had to march. They'd line us up outside the dorm and march us to class. We took code and typing inside of an old church. I don't remember what denomination, but we took electronics and scientific classes in another part of the campus. And to get to this place where we took these classes, we had to march past the old boarded up stadium. And we could see the massive old wooden doors to the stadium, and it was all closed up, and we marched past those doors every day, not knowing that fusion was being performed inside that old stadium at the University of Chicago. Ferrari was there, and they were putting these rods in to control the speed of the fusion and all of these atomic particles. It was all going on inside that stadium, and of course we had no idea when we marched by it that all this was going on, because it was all very top secret. When we found out the news that Japan had surrendered, why, we were in the harbor of a group of islands called Kurmareta, about 20 miles off the coast of Okinawa, and there were just hundreds of ships in this harbor. And in the excitement, why, many of the ships fired their guns up into the air, and they tried to bring it to a halt, which they eventually did, But during the time that they were firing all these guns, why, one of the shells came down and landed on our deck, and our radar man got a foot full of shrapnel, and he had to leave the ship, and so I had to do double duty for a while, both standing radio watch and radar watch. The radar was much simpler back then because it had only been invented for a little while, and it was a cathode ray tube, and with the rotating disc on top of the ship scanning, why, it just left a green line that would go around the scope, and whenever the radar signals would pick up anything and reflect back, it would leave a blurb or an image on the scope. And when I stood the duty, why, I was to watch the scope all the time, and if it picked up anything, to inform the bridge. And even if you didn't pick up anything, why, you were supposed to call up to the bridge every 3, 4, 5 minutes just to let them know that all was clear. Well, when the war ended, I was still at Okinawa doing radar picket duty, and then it was then that I left the ship because of appendicitis attack, and then instead of getting back to my ship, they put me on a captain's staff as his radioman to go up to the inland sea of Japan and destroy these mines. When that job was over with, I had enough points to muster out to go home. And so instead of flying back to the States, I was put on the crew of this ship that had been torpedoed, just boarded up, a plate over the hole, and it carried 18 foot of water in number 2 hold. So the top speed that ship could go was 5 knots. So we came back to Seattle, Washington, all the way across the Pacific Ocean at 5 knots. It took us 45 days to come back. Got off ship, and right away, instead of taking the train back, why, 5 of us paid money to a fellow that was driving a car coming back to Omaha, I think it was, picking up house trailers and hauling them back to the coast. And coming back to get the trailer, we wasn't pulling anything, and so I don't know how my fellows sailors found out about it, but anyway, we each chipped in some money to him, and so when we came back, why, we got us. My parents were living at Larned then, and when we got to Phillipsburg, which is right over here, they kicked me out of the car and said, from there down to Larned, you have to find your own way. And this was at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. Went into Martha's Cafe, and there were people in the cafe, and so we just announced loudly that anybody going south, why, if they could take a sailor, he was heading for Larned, and one fellow said, well, I'm going to Great Bend, which is only 23 miles from Larned. I said, great, I have an uncle living in Great Bend, and he dropped me off at my uncle's house at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I woke him up, and he took me on then back to Larned to my home. And so when I got back to this, I got a 30-day leave, and I came home, met my wife, and told her I was going to get married as soon as I got mustered out. And she was starting to worry because I had to go back to Chicago then to get mustered out, and it took a little longer than planned, and I made it back just 3 days before our wedding. We were just stuck on Navy Pier, waiting to to get our orders to muster out. And then they didn't muster us out there. They sent us to St. Louis to actually get discharged. I met Doris on my 30-day leave coming back from the overseas. In Larned, five of us high school buddies were going to go to Manhattan to K-State and then pre-enroll, and I knew, well, I'm going to Emporia State where my father went, but I'll just go along for the ride and for the fun of it. And so we got they got it pre-enrolled in K-State early enough in the day. One said, I've got a stepsister living at the YWCA in Wichita. Let's call her, have her get us dates, and we'll go dancing at the Blue Moon in Wichita. And so she found some girls, which Doris was one. Three of us wanted, when we met the girls, we hadn't decided who was going to go with who. Three of us all wanted Doris. So we said, well, how are we going to decide who gets who? And one of them said, let's flip. An odd man gets to take Doris. I was odd man, so I got to take Doris. First date, I fell madly in love. I told her that I was going to marry her. She said, well, I'm not even supposed to be with you. She said, I'm already spoken for. I said, well, I got to change that. She didn't know anything about it until afterwards.
Never change. Guys never change.
Went to Chicago and got mustered out, came back, got married, had a 2-week honeymoon in Estes Park, and went to college at Lynchburg, Kansas. My first of this month will have been married 68 years. My bachelor's degree at Bethany College, Lynchburg, and my master's degree in music education at the University of Colorado out at Boulder. I went through Bethany in 3.5 years because I went to summer schools too. So my 4th year, I got out in January before the Messiah performed that 4th year. The first year I was there, I sang in the chorus. The next 2 years they found out I played oboe, so I played oboe in the orchestra for the Messiah. I hope the countries can find solutions to somewhat world peace so that we don't, because I think if there is a next war, it'll be horrible. Well, I went in at still 17. I turned 18 in boot camp, and I came out at age 20. I've often said I wouldn't trade the experience for anything in the world, but I wouldn't want to do it again.